My name is Lillian, and I am 32 years old. I built my career as a software engineer in Seattle through hard work and determination. Growing up was tough with parents who always favored my younger sister, Amanda. Every achievement of mine was overshadowed by her mediocrity. Recently, I got a call from my parents asking for a substantial amount of money for Amanda's latest business venture. After a lifetime of unequal treatment, I finally said no. The silence that followed was deafening, but surprisingly liberating. Before I share how my parents reacted when I finally stood up for myself, let me know where you are watching from and subscribe to hear more stories about finding your strength in difficult family situations. My earliest memories take me back to our middle-class neighborhood in Portland, Oregon. My father, Thomas, worked as an accountant at a local firm. He was always meticulous about numbers at work, but somehow this precision never extended to balancing the attention between his daughters. My mother, Eleanor, was an elementary school teacher who ironically taught her students about fairness, but practiced something very different at home. I was 5 years old when Amanda was born. I still remember the excitement I felt about having a baby sister. I imagined us sharing secrets, playing together, and being best friends for life. That fantasy quickly dissolved into confusion as I witnessed my parents transform before my eyes. The change was subtle at first, almost imperceptible to my young mind, but it grew more obvious with each passing year. By the time I was 8, the pattern had established itself firmly. Amanda would receive new clothes from the department store while I wore hand-me-downs or items from discount shops. My mother would justify it by saying I was not as interested in fashion, creating a narrative about me that was not true, but served their favoritism. School was where I found my first taste of validation. My teachers praised my intelligence and work ethic. I brought home straight A's term after term, hoping to see pride in my parents' eyes. Instead, my report cards were met with brief acknowledgments like, "Good job, Lillian," before being tucked away in a drawer. Meanwhile, when Amanda brought home C's and B's, there would be celebrations and rewards for her improvement, or for subjects she was trying hard in. When I turned 10, I discovered computers. Our elementary school had just installed a small computer lab, and from the moment I sat down at the keyboard, something clicked. I would stay after school to learn basic programming, teaching myself through books borrowed from the library and free online resources. At home, I would excitedly tell my parents about what I had learned, only to be met with dismissive comments like, "That is just playing on the computer," or "Do not waste too much time on that." The contrast in how our achievements were celebrated became painfully obvious during holiday seasons. One Christmas when I was 11, I unwrapped practical gifts like clothes and school supplies, while Amanda received an expensive electronic keyboard and designer clothes, despite showing no particular interest in music. When I questioned the disparity, my mother said, "Amanda needs more encouragement to find her talents. You are already good at school." My salvation came in the form of my maternal grandparents, Margaret and William. Unlike my parents, they saw me. They recognized my potential, my interests, and my hurt feelings. During their visits, they would ask about my computer projects and actually listen to my explanations with genuine interest. They attended my school events when my parents were too busy with Amanda's activities. When I turned 12, my grandparents gave me my first real computer. It was not the newest model, but it was mine, and it was perfect. I remember the way my heart soared when I unwrapped it. But even this moment of joy was tainted by my parents' reaction. They criticized my grandparents for the extravagant gift, claiming it would distract from my schoolwork, despite my perfect academic record. I overheard the argument from my bedroom that night, my grandfather's normally gentle voice raised in frustration as he defended his choice of gift, and by extension, me. That computer became my refuge. When the house buzzed with excitement over Amanda's dance recitals or art projects, I retreated to my room and immersed myself in coding. I built simple programs, learned new languages, and dreamed of a future where my skills would be valued. Little did I know then that this coping mechanism would eventually become my ticket to freedom and success. During those early years, I developed a pattern of seeking validation elsewhere, since it was not available at home. My teachers became surrogate providers of praise, and my grandparents became the parental figures who celebrated my achievements. It was a confusing way to grow up knowing that the people who were supposed to be my biggest supporters were instead my sister's exclusive cheerleaders. As I approached my teenage years, the foundation had been laid for a lifetime of unequal treatment, but I was developing strengths that would eventually help me break free. Resilience, self-reliance, and determination were forming within me, not because my parents fostered these qualities, but because their absence in my life made these traits necessary for my survival. My teenage years marked a period of growing awareness and resentment. Between 14 and 16, I excelled academically, particularly in mathematics and computer science. My teachers often commented that I was operating at a college level, but at home, this recognition continued to fall on deaf ears. In 10th grade, I developed a program that analyzed weather patterns and predicted local microclimates. It was basic by professional standards, but impressive for a self-taught high school student. I entered it in the regional science fair and won first place. The local newspaper even ran a small article about it. My parents attended the fair but spent most of their time checking their watches, making it clear they were only there out of obligation. When the judges announced my name, my father nodded briefly while my mother clapped politely, both of them looking eager to leave. The next day, when the newspaper arrived with my photo, my father flipped past it to the sports section without comment. That same year, Amanda was struggling with basic algebra and history. Her grades hovered around C's and D's, causing much distress in our household. My parents immediately hired expensive tutors for her, spending hundreds of dollars each month to help her achieve the passing grades that came naturally to me. One evening, I overheard my mother on the phone with Amanda's math tutor saying, "Money is no object. We just want her to succeed." Inspired by my science fair success, I researched summer coding camps and found one at a nearby university. When I approached my parents about it, their response was immediate and predictable. "We cannot afford that, Lillian," my father said firmly. "You know things are tight right now." This was the same month they had purchased Amanda a new laptop because hers was too slow, though it was newer than my grandparents' gift that I still used. One day, while helping my mother file some papers, I accidentally discovered a bank statement showing a substantial savings account labeled Amanda's Dance Career Fund. They had been setting aside money for years to support a professional dance career that Amanda had mentioned wanting, despite her switching interests every few months. There was no equivalent fund for my education or future. The discovery hurt deeply, but it also galvanized me. If my parents would not invest in my future, I would have to do it myself. I got a part-time job at a local tech store, working weekends and some evenings. My parents barely noticed my absence from home, and when they did, they commented that I was always so independent, as if it were a personality trait rather than a necessity. When my grandparents learned about the coding camp and my efforts to save for it, they were outraged. They offered to pay for the entire thing, which led to a heated argument between them and my parents. I overheard phrases like blatant favoritism and "she's your daughter too" from my grandfather's usually measured voice. Eventually, my parents reluctantly agreed to let me attend the camp, with my grandparents footing the bill, but made me feel guilty about the expense by mentioning how generous my grandparents were being and how I should be extremely grateful. The camp was transformative. For 2 weeks, I was surrounded by peers who shared my passion and mentors who encouraged my talent. I returned home with new skills and connections, but also with a clearer understanding of the contrast between how I was valued outside my home versus within it. During these years, my relationship with my grandparents deepened. They became my confidants and champions. When I expressed interest in advanced programming books that were beyond my budget, they would send them as "just because" gifts. They attended my school presentations when my parents were too busy with Amanda's activities. They listened to my dreams and validated my feelings in ways my parents never did. At 16, I experienced my first serious heartbreak when my boyfriend James broke up with me after spending a weekend with my family. He had been uncomfortable with how differently I was treated compared to Amanda. "It's weird, Lillian," he said when ending things. "It's like they don't see how amazing you are, and you just take it. I don't think I can watch that." His words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. An outsider had noticed in a weekend what I had been living with my entire life. The breakup pushed me further into isolation. I doubled down on academics and my part-time job, avoiding social events and new friendships. If I could not be loved properly by my own family, how could I expect anyone else to value me? This thinking was flawed, but at 16, it felt like a protective shield. Senior year brought a small triumph that was quickly overshadowed. I graduated as valedictorian of my class, an achievement that required years of perfect grades and dedicated study. My graduation ceremony fell on the same weekend as Amanda's spring dance recital. My parents attended my graduation, but made it clear they were disappointed about missing part of Amanda's performance. During what should have been a celebration dinner, they repeatedly checked their phones for updates from Amanda's dance instructor and left early to catch the end of her recital. My grandparents, who had traveled from Florida for my graduation, were visibly upset by my parents' behavior, but tried to maintain a celebratory atmosphere for my sake. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, my grandfather found me sitting alone on the porch. "You know, Lillian," he said, settling beside me, "some people are so blinded by what's right in front of them that they miss the brightest star in their sky." His words were a balm, but they could not completely heal the wound of being overlooked on what should have been my day. The autumn after high school graduation marked the beginning of a new chapter in my life. I had been accepted to the University of Washington's prestigious computer science program with a partial scholarship. While not a full ride, it was a significant achievement given the program's competitive nature. When I shared the news with my parents, their response was lukewarm at best. "That's nice, Lillian," my mother said, glancing up briefly from helping Amanda with college applications despite her mediocre grades. "But Seattle is expensive. We always thought you'd go to Portland Community College for 2 years first." "We can't help much with costs," my father added. "We've been saving for years, but with Amanda possibly going to art school next year." The implication was clear. The college fund, which I had always assumed was for both of us, had apparently been earmarked primarily for Amanda. Despite my scholarship and academic achievements, they had never planned for my education beyond the local community college. My grandparents, however, were ecstatic about my acceptance. After hearing about my parents' reluctance to provide financial support, they stepped in without hesitation. "We're so proud of you, Lillian," my grandmother said during a private phone call. "And we want you to have this opportunity. We'll cover whatever your scholarship doesn't." Their generosity brought me to tears. Without them, I might have had to defer my dreams or take on crippling debt. Instead, I was able to accept the offer and prepare for my move to Seattle. Leaving Portland felt like escaping a cage I hadn't fully realized I was in. As the distance between my family and me grew, so did my ability to breathe freely. Seattle welcomed me with its vibrant tech scene, diverse population, and the promise of reinvention. My assigned roommate Zoe quickly became more than just someone I shared space with. She was warm, outgoing, and genuinely interested in me as a person, qualities I wasn't accustomed to receiving from anyone besides my grandparents. One night, after noticing my surprise at her enthusiasm over my perfect score on a difficult programming assignment, she asked about my family. "They're more my sister's cheerleaders than mine," I explained hesitantly, unaccustomed to discussing the dynamic. "That's messed up," Zoe said bluntly. "You're brilliant, Lillian. If they don't see that, it's their loss." Her straightforward validation was refreshing and healing. Through Zoe, I made other friends who appreciated my intelligence, dry humor, and loyalty, qualities that had gone largely unnoticed at home. For the first time, I began building a social circle that felt like what family should be. Academically, I thrived. My professors recognized my talent and work ethic, often suggesting advanced projects or research opportunities. But despite my success, I still struggled with feelings of inadequacy and a persistent need to prove my worth. I worked harder than most of my classmates, taking on extra credits and research positions, as if accumulating achievements could fill the void left by my parents' emotional neglect. Financially, things were tight despite my grandparents' support. I took on multiple part-time jobs, tutoring other students in programming, working at the university computer lab, and freelancing on small coding projects. I sent my grandparents detailed accounts of my expenses, always afraid they might think I was taking advantage of their generosity. "Lillian, dear," my grandmother said during one of our weekly calls when I apologized for a textbook expense. We want to do this. You're investing in your future and we're honored to help. Please stop worrying. Halfway through my freshman year, I learned that Amanda had dropped out of community college after just one semester. According to my mother, who called with the news as if announcing a minor schedule change, Amanda had decided college wasn't her path and needed time to find herself. Instead of insisting she continue her education or get a job, my parents financed a year in Europe for her to explore her passions. The contrast was stark. While I worked multiple jobs to minimize the burden on my grandparents while maintaining a 4.0 GPA, Amanda was gallery hopping in Paris and taking cooking classes in Italy, all funded by the college savings that apparently couldn't stretch to help me. By junior year, the constant stress and unresolved feelings about my family began affecting my health. I experienced anxiety attacks before visits home and returned to Seattle emotionally drained after each holiday. At Zoe's urging, I started seeing Dr. Rivera, a therapist, through the university's counseling center. What you're describing is a classic case of family favoritism and emotional neglect, Dr. Rivera explained during one session. Your achievements weren't celebrated because they didn't fit the narrative your parents created. It's not about you lacking anything. It's about them failing to see what was right in front of them. These therapy sessions were revelatory. For the first time, I had a framework for understanding my childhood experiences. I wasn't oversensitive or demanding too much. I had been subjected to a damaging family dynamic that prioritized one child over another. During my senior year, I secured an internship at a major tech company in Seattle. The experience confirmed what I already knew: I had a talent for this work. Before graduation, they offered me a full-time position with a starting salary that exceeded my expectations. When I called my parents with the news, my mother's response was, "That's nice, honey. But speaking of jobs, do you think you could help Amanda with her resume? She's thinking about applying for retail positions." My graduation ceremony was a bittersweet affair. My grandparents arrived 2 days early, taking me to a celebratory dinner and presenting me with a beautiful watch engraved with the words, "Time to shine." My parents, however, arrived barely an hour before the ceremony began, having stopped to take Amanda shopping for a dress to wear to my graduation, making us all nearly late. As I accepted my diploma with high honors, I spotted my grandparents in the audience beaming with pride. My parents sat beside them, my father checking his phone, and my mother helping Amanda take photos, both missing the moment my name was called. It was a perfect encapsulation of our family dynamic and a fitting end to this chapter of my life. Walking off that stage, degree in hand, I made a silent promise to myself. The next chapter would be different. The next chapter would be mine. With my computer science degree and job offer in hand, I began my career at a leading tech company in Seattle. The corporate world was challenging, but in many ways simpler than family dynamics. Performance reviews were based on measurable results, not arbitrary preferences or long-established narratives. Hard work and intelligence were rewarded with promotions and raises. For someone who had grown up with the opposite experience, this merit-based environment was refreshing. Within 2 years, I had received 2 promotions, moving from junior developer to software engineer with a team under my guidance. My managers praised my problem-solving abilities and leadership skills. Each performance review and salary increase felt like a vindication, concrete evidence that I was valuable and capable, despite the message my childhood had imprinted on me. Outside of work, I built a life filled with friends who appreciated me for who I was. Zoe and I remained close, sharing an apartment for the first year after graduation. Through her, I met other young professionals in Seattle's vibrant tech scene. Weekend hikes in the surrounding mountains, coding meetups, and dinner parties replaced the dread that used to accompany free time during my college years, when visits home loomed. I maintained regular contact with my grandparents, calling them weekly and visiting when possible. They had become my true parental figures, offering the unconditional support and pride that my actual parents reserved for Amanda. Their health was beginning to show signs of age, making each visit more precious. My relationship with my parents, however, remained strained. I called monthly out of a sense of obligation conversations that rarely lasted more than 10 minutes and consisted mainly of updates about Amanda interspersed with cursory questions about my job that showed little real interest in my life. Amanda's post-college years were marked by a series of short-lived ventures. After returning from Europe, she launched a fashion blog that was abandoned after 3 months. Next came a jewelry-making business that produced a few overpriced pieces before she lost interest. Then there was the organic bakery concept that never progressed beyond a logo design and social media accounts. Each new passion was funded primarily by my parents, who remained convinced that Amanda just needed to find her true calling. And increasingly, they began to see me with my steady job and growing savings as an additional source of financial support for their favorite daughter. Lillian, sweetie, my mother said during one call, Amanda's bakery needs some equipment to get started. Could you loan her $2,000 just until she starts making a profit? Against my better judgment, I agreed. That loan, like the smaller ones before it, was never repaid. When I gently inquired about repayment 6 months later, my mother seemed shocked. But she's your sister, she said, as if that explained everything. Besides, it's not like you need the money with your fancy tech job. I met Nathan at a work conference when I was 26. He was a software architect at another company, brilliant and funny with kind eyes that crinkled when he smiled. Our relationship developed quickly, both of us recognizing something in the other that felt like home. Nathan was the first person outside my therapist who truly understood the depth of pain my family dynamic had caused. After witnessing a particularly dismissive phone call from my mother, he asked questions no one else had dared to. Why do you keep trying to win the approval of people who seem determined not to give it? He asked gently. I see how these calls affect you. You're amazing, Lillian. Your parents' inability to see that is their failing, not yours. His perspective was both comforting and challenging. Was I continuing to seek validation that would never come? Was I enabling the very dynamic that hurt me by providing financial support whenever they asked? Around this time, my grandfather's health took a serious turn. During a visit to their retirement community in Arizona, he requested a private conversation. Sitting in their small garden, his hand trembling slightly as he patted mine, he addressed the elephant in the room. I've watched how they treat you for nearly 30 years now, he said, his voice soft but clear. Your grandmother and I have tried to talk to your mother about it many times, but she either denies it or gets defensive. I need you to know something, Lillian. There will come a point when you'll have to stand up for yourself. Not for them, not for us, but for you. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. You've spent your life trying to earn love that should have been freely given, he continued. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop trying and accept that the problem isn't yours to fix. His words stayed with me long after I returned to Seattle. They resurfaced a month later when my 28th birthday passed with just a text message from my parents, while Amanda's birthday the same month warranted a surprise party and expensive gifts. When Nathan proposed shortly after, my joy was tempered by the knowledge that sharing this milestone with my family wouldn't bring the reaction I deserved. I was right. My mother's first question was whether we could ensure Amanda would be a bridesmaid. My father's primary concern was whether we expected them to contribute financially. The wedding planning brought the family dynamics into sharp relief. My parents insisted on inviting several of Amanda's friends, claiming they were practically family, while questioning the inclusion of my colleagues and friends from Seattle. When the venue had limited capacity, they suggested cutting from my guest list rather than reducing Amanda's tangential connections. Nathan and I ultimately decided to pay for most of the wedding ourselves, reducing my parents' input and control. My grandparents, despite my protests, insisted on contributing a generous amount with no strings attached. We want to do this, my grandmother said firmly. Consider it an investment in happiness, which is the best kind. The wedding day itself was beautiful despite the undercurrent of tension. My parents performed their expected roles, but it was my grandfather who gave the most touching speech, bringing tears to many guests' eyes as he spoke about watching me grow into a remarkable woman despite challenges. As I danced with my new husband that night, surrounded by people who genuinely celebrated our union, I realized I was creating my own family now. One built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and shared values. It was a powerful realization, both liberating and bittersweet. 4 years into my marriage at 32, I had established myself as a senior software engineer with a reputation for innovative solutions and strong leadership. Nathan and I had purchased our first home, a modern townhouse in a Seattle neighborhood known for its community feel and excellent schools. We were discussing starting a family, though I still harbored anxieties about parenthood given my own childhood experiences. My relationship with my parents remained superficial but cordial. We spoke every few weeks, visited on major holidays, and maintained the appearance of a normal family relationship. Under the surface, however, the old patterns persisted. My achievements were acknowledged briefly before conversation turned to Amanda's latest pursuits. The emotional distance remained, but I had made peace with it through years of therapy and the support of Nathan and my chosen family of friends. Amanda, now in her late 20s, had continued her pattern of starting and abandoning various career paths. After the failed bakery, there had been a photography business, a stint as a social media manager, and briefly a job at a marketing firm that ended when she decided the corporate world was stifling her creativity. On a Tuesday evening in April, my phone rang with my parents' number. It was unusual for them to call midweek, and I felt a familiar knot of tension form in my stomach as I answered. "Lillian, we need to talk to you about something important," my father began without preamble. "It's about Amanda." Of course it was. When was it ever about anything else? "She's finally found her true passion," my mother chimed in, her voice brimming with enthusiasm that I had rarely heard directed toward any of my accomplishments. "She's starting a luxury dog accessories boutique. The business plan looks amazing." I listened as they outlined Amanda's vision, a high-end store selling custom-designed collars, clothing, and accessories for pets, targeted at affluent dog owners in Portland. As someone who had built a career evaluating viability and potential, I could immediately spot the flaws in the concept: the oversaturated market, the high overhead, the limited customer base. But I remained silent, knowing from experience that my analysis would be unwelcome. "She needs startup capital," my father finally said, coming to the point of the call. "We're asking family members to invest. How much is she looking for?" I asked, already anticipating that the answer would be substantial. There was a pause before my mother responded. $75,000. I nearly dropped the phone. The amount was staggering, more than we had paid as a down payment on our house. "That's a significant investment," I said carefully. "Has she approached any banks or legitimate investors?" "Banks don't understand creative businesses," my father dismissed. "And investors want too much control. This needs to stay in the family." "Besides," my mother added with a laugh that set my teeth on edge, "that's nothing for someone making your salary. You and Nathan both have those big tech jobs." The assumption that our money was somehow available for Amanda's use without serious consideration bothered me deeply. I took a breath before responding. "I'd need to see a detailed business plan before considering that kind of investment," I said. "Market research, projected revenue, operational costs, marketing strategy." My parents' tone immediately shifted from enthusiastic to defensive. "You don't trust your own sister?" my mother asked, her voice taking on the wounded quality she had perfected over years of emotional manipulation. "After everything we've done for you." The irony of that statement was almost laughable. What exactly had they done for me besides the basic legal requirements of parenthood? My education had been funded by scholarships and my grandparents. My career had been built through my own hard work. My emotional well-being had been preserved despite their actions, not because of them. "It's not about trust," I explained, trying to keep my voice level. "It's about sound financial decision-making. No one should invest that amount without due diligence." The conversation grew increasingly tense. My father accused me of being selfish and forgetting where I came from. My mother implied that my success had made me think I'm better than family, but I held firm on needing to see a proper business plan. "I'll have Amanda send you some information." My father finally conceded, his tone making it clear he thought I was being unreasonable. After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence. Nathan found me that way when he arrived home 20 minutes later. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately, setting down his bag and coming to sit beside me. I explained the conversation, my voice breaking occasionally as I recounted their assumptions and accusations. "You know you don't have to give them the money, right?" Nathan said, taking my hand. "Not for Amanda, not for anyone. It's okay to say no." "But they're my parents," I replied, voicing the obligation that had been programmed into me since childhood. "Yes, they're your parents, but that doesn't give them the right to treat you like an ATM while continuing to prioritize Amanda's dreams over your feelings." The next day, Amanda sent an email with attachments she called a business plan. What I received was a collection of Pinterest boards, some rough sketches of product ideas, and a basic spreadsheet with wildly optimistic sales projections. There was no market analysis, no competitive research, no realistic operational budget. More concerning, buried in the financial section was a line item for debt repayment, amounting to nearly $20,000. I called my parents that evening after consulting with Nathan. "I noticed there's a significant amount allocated for debt repayment in Amanda's projections," I said after pleasantries were exchanged. "What kind of debt are we talking about?" There was a telling pause. "Just some credit card bills from previous business attempts," my mother said dismissively. "Everyone has credit card debt." Further questioning revealed that Amanda had accumulated over $30,000 in credit card debt across 6 cards, most of it from failed business ventures and necessary expenses, while figuring out her path. My parents had been making minimum payments on some of the cards, but were finding it increasingly difficult. It became clear that a substantial portion of my investment would go toward bailing Amanda out of debt rather than actually launching a viable business. The revelation was the final piece I needed to make my decision. That night, I barely slept. Memories from throughout my life played in my mind like a movie Christmas mornings, where Amanda received expensive gifts while I got practical items, school events my parents missed while never failing to attend Amanda's activities, the college fund that somehow only covered Amanda's education, the constant stream of money toward her failed ventures while I worked multiple jobs to support myself. The next morning, I called Dr. Rivera, my therapist, to discuss the situation. We had been meeting less frequently in recent years, but I still valued her perspective. "What would you tell a friend who came to you with this situation?" she asked. "I'd tell them they're being taken advantage of and should protect themselves," I admitted. "And why should you deserve any less protection than you'd advise for a friend?" She was right. I deserve to set boundaries just as much as anyone else. I called my grandparents next, now living in an assisted living facility in Arizona. Despite their advancing age, their minds remained sharp, and they had always been my wisest counselors. "Your grandfather and I have been waiting for this moment," my grandmother said after I explained the situation. "There comes a point when enabling has to stop for everyone's sake." Strengthened by these conversations, I called my parents that evening. Nathan sat beside me, his presence a silent support as I put the phone on speaker. "I've looked over Amanda's business plan," I began, "and I'm sorry, but I won't be investing in this venture." The silence on the other end lasted only a moment before the storm broke. "I can't believe how selfish you've become," my mother said, her voice rising. "After all we've done for you." "You've always been jealous of your sister," my father added. "She has vision and creativity while you just followed the safe path." I took a deep breath, feeling Nathan's hand tighten around mine. "I'm not jealous of Amanda," I said firmly. "I'm tired of being treated like my accomplishments matter less and my resources matter more. For as long as I can remember, her dreams have been funded and celebrated while mine were ignored unless they benefited her in some way." "That's ridiculous," my mother scoffed. "We've always treated you both equally." "No," I said, finding strength I didn't know I had. "You haven't, and I think you know that." The conversation escalated, my parents cycling through guilt, anger, and manipulation tactics that had worked in the past. They brought up times they had sacrificed for me, most of which I had no recollection of or had very different memories about. They implied I didn't love my sister if I wouldn't help her. They suggested my success had made me cold and calculating. Through it all, I remained calm but firm. When they realized I wouldn't budge, my father played their final card. "If you don't help your sister, "You're not part of this family anymore," he said, his voice cold. Something broke and healed within me simultaneously at those words. The truth I had always known but never acknowledged was finally spoken aloud. "Maybe I never really was," I replied softly before ending the call. The moments after I hung up the phone were both devastating and strangely peaceful. Tears streamed down my face as years of suppressed emotions finally found release. Nathan held me without speaking, understanding that no words could adequately address a lifetime of conditional love suddenly made explicit. "I can't believe I actually did that," I whispered when I could finally speak. "I've never stood up to them before." "I'm proud of you," Nathan said, brushing hair from my tear-stained face. "It took incredible courage." That night was difficult. I oscillated between certainty that I had done the right thing and waves of guilt that had been programmed into me since childhood. What if Amanda really did need the money? What if this business was the one that would finally succeed? Was I a terrible daughter and sister for refusing to help? Nathan listened patiently as I voiced these doubts, gently reminding me of the reality of the situation each time guilt threatened to overwhelm me. "If your parents are serious about cutting you off for not giving them $75,000, that's not love," he pointed out. "That's exploitation." The next week passed in eerie silence. No calls from my parents, which was unprecedented after a disagreement. Usually, they would call repeatedly, escalating their tactics until I gave in. The silence was both liberating and unnerving. I checked my phone compulsively, torn between relief and anxiety each time there were no messages from them. The silence from my parents was broken by an onslaught from Amanda. First came angry text messages accusing me of abandoning family and thinking I'm too good for them now. When I didn't respond, she escalated to social media, posting thinly veiled comments about selfish siblings and forgetting where you came from. The attacks were painful but also revealing. They confirmed that my parents had presented the situation to Amanda as a simple case of me refusing to help family, rather than acknowledging the complex history and current manipulation at play. For my own mental health, I temporarily blocked Amanda on all platforms. That weekend, Nathan and I drove to visit my grandparents at their assisted living facility. The 2-hour drive gave us time to talk through the situation further, and by the time we arrived, I felt more centered. My grandparents welcomed us warmly, my grandmother's embrace lingering a bit longer than usual, communicating understanding without words. Over lunch in their small apartment, I explained what had happened in more detail. "We're not surprised, unfortunately," my grandfather said, his voice weary. "Your mother has always favored Amanda, even as a child herself. She was the youngest in her family and felt overlooked. Somehow that translated into overcompensating with Amanda. We've tried to talk to her about it many times over the years," my grandmother added. "Even before you were born, when she was pregnant with you, we saw signs that she might repeat patterns from her own childhood. When you were little, we spoke up whenever we saw the favoritism becoming obvious." "You did?" I asked, surprised. I had always known they recognized the unequal treatment, but I hadn't realized they had actively tried to intervene. "Many times," my grandfather confirmed. "It usually led to arguments and your mother accusing us of interfering. As you got older, we worried that drawing too much attention to it might make things worse for you when we weren't around." He reached for my hand across the table. "We made a decision when you were about 12 after that computer incident. We adjusted our will to ensure that you would be protected. We couldn't fix how your parents treated you, but we could make sure you had resources for your future that couldn't be diverted to Amanda." This revelation was both touching and saddening, the fact that my grandparents had recognized the need to protect me from my own parents' financial favoritism so early. A week after my confrontation with my parents, they finally called again. I steeled myself before answering, hoping perhaps for an acknowledgement of my feelings, or at least a willingness to discuss things rationally. Instead, my father launched immediately into another request for money, as if our previous conversation had never happened. When I firmly repeated my refusal, they hung up without another word. 3 days later, they showed up unannounced at our home in Seattle, having driven up from Portland. The surprise visit caught me off guard, and seeing them standing on my doorstep sent a rush of conflicting emotions through me: hope and anxiety, longing and dread. But it quickly became clear they hadn't come to reconcile or understand my perspective. They had come to pressure me in person, believing I couldn't refuse them face to face. They brought Amanda along, apparently thinking her presence would make it harder for me to say no. "We're family," my mother repeated multiple times as if the word alone was an irrefutable argument. "Family helps each other. Family also respects boundaries," I countered, fighting to keep my voice steady. "Family treats members with equal love and consideration." The conversation grew heated. When Amanda began listing all the ways I had abandoned her while hoarding my success, Nathan, who had been silently supportive beside me, finally spoke up. "That's enough," he said firmly. "Lillian has done nothing but work hard her entire life while receiving very little emotional support from any of you. She doesn't owe you her hard-earned money, especially not without a viable business plan." My parents acted shocked at his intervention, as if he had no right to defend his wife in our own home. When they realized neither of us would yield, they escalated to threats and guilt trips. It was my father who finally crossed the line by suggesting that my selfishness would be remembered when they were no longer around, a thinly veiled threat about inheritance that held little power given they had little to leave and had always favored Amanda anyway. "I think it's time for you to leave," Nathan said, standing up. "Lillian has made her decision and we both stand by it." After they left, I broke down again, the confrontation having drained what emotional reserves I had built up. Nathan held me, reassuring me that I had done nothing wrong, that their behavior was the problem, not my boundaries. Later that evening, I received a call from my grandmother. My parents had contacted them immediately after leaving our house, apparently hoping to enlist them in pressuring me. Instead, my grandparents had been appalled by their behavior and decided it was time for a family meeting. "We've arranged for everyone to meet at our place this weekend," my grandmother explained. "It's time some things were said out loud." That Saturday, we gathered in the community room of my grandparents' assisted living facility. My parents arrived looking defensive, Amanda sullen, and I felt anxious but determined. My grandparents had asked that Nathan come as well, recognizing his importance in my support system. My grandfather, despite his declining health, took charge of the meeting with a strength I hadn't seen in years. "We're here because this family has a problem that's been ignored for too long," he began. "Eleanor Thomas, you have consistently favored Amanda over Lillian since they were children. We've watched it happen for 30 years, tried to talk to you about it countless times, and nothing has changed." My mother immediately began to protest, but my grandfather raised his hand. "Let me finish." Every achievement of Lillian's was downplayed while Amanda's smallest efforts were celebrated. "Lillian's college education was largely funded by us because you claimed you couldn't afford it yet. You sent Amanda to Europe when she dropped out of community college. Now you're asking Lillian to invest $75,000 in another of Amanda's ventures while threatening to cut her off if she refuses. This stops today." My mother's face had grown increasingly flushed during this speech. "That's completely untrue," she insisted. "We've always treated both girls exactly the same. Lillian has always been jealous of Amanda's creativity and social nature." "Eleanor," my grandmother interjected, her voice gentle but firm. "We have watched this happen since Lillian was a little girl. We have photographs of Christmas mornings where Amanda's gifts tower over Lillian's. We have saved answering machine messages where you called to cancel plans with Lillian because of Amanda's activities. We were there when you missed Lillian's valedictorian speech to attend Amanda's recital. This isn't about jealousy, it's about a pattern of behavior that has hurt one of your daughters deeply." The meeting continued with my parents denying everything, Amanda occasionally interjecting to claim I had always had everything easy because of my natural intelligence, while she had to work for everything. The rewriting of history was staggering, but not surprising. When it became clear that my parents would not acknowledge any wrongdoing, my grandfather made an announcement that silenced the room. "Since you refuse to recognize the harm you've caused, we're making a change. The financial support we've been providing to you both over the years is ending. We love you, Eleanor, but we won't continue to enable this toxic dynamic." My parents were shocked. I hadn't been aware that my grandparents had been regularly helping them financially, but it explained their comfortable lifestyle despite modest careers. "You can't do that," my father sputtered. "You're choosing Lillian over your own daughter." "No," my grandfather replied calmly. "We're choosing not to support harmful behavior anymore. We've tried for decades to help you see what you're doing, but you refuse. Sometimes consequences are the only way forward." My parents stormed out, taking Amanda with them and leaving a heavy silence in their wake. Before they left, my mother turned to me with a look of pure betrayal. "I hope you're happy," she said bitterly. "You've turned everyone against us." After they left, my grandparents embraced me. "We're sorry it came to this," my grandmother whispered. "But sometimes the kindest thing isn't the easiest." As Nathan and I drove home that evening, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication that my experiences had finally been acknowledged, grief for the family relationships that might never heal, and a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in my life, I had stood firm in my truth and been supported by those who mattered most. The family I had, now my husband and grandparents, was smaller than before, but built on genuine love and respect. It was a painful revelation, but also a liberating one. Sometimes family is found in unexpected places, and sometimes the bravest thing you can do is accept that not everyone who should love you will. In the 6 months that followed the confrontation at my grandparents' assisted living facility, my life entered a phase of both healing and adjustment. The complete absence of contact from my parents was both a relief and a new kind of pain. There were no more manipulative calls, no more comparisons to Amanda, no more subtle reminders of my supposed inadequacies. But there was also the stark reality of estrangement, the empty space where family relationships should exist, even flawed ones. I intensified my therapy sessions with Dr. Rivera, now focusing on processing the grief that came with family estrangement, rather than managing ongoing toxic interactions. She suggested I join a support group for adult children of emotionally neglectful parents, a recommendation I initially resisted, but eventually embraced. "I feel like I'm overreacting," I confessed during my first group session. "Some people have parents who were physically abusive or abandoned them completely. Mine just loved my sister more." An older woman named Judith shook her head gently. "Emotional neglect leaves invisible scars. Just because others can't see them doesn't make them less painful or real." The group became an unexpected source of validation and healing. Hearing others articulate experiences similar to mine helped dissolve the lingering doubt that I was somehow at fault or too sensitive. These were successful, intelligent adults who had suffered the same confusing disconnect between what family should be and what they had experienced. Meanwhile, my professional life continued to flourish. I was promoted to technical director at my company, leading a team developing new security protocols. The irony wasn't lost on me that I had built a career creating secure systems, while my personal boundaries had been violated for years. Nathan remained my rock throughout this period, never pushing me to reconcile with my parents, but also never speaking ill of them, somehow understanding that despite everything, part of me still longed for their approval and love. "They're still your parents," he said one evening as we discussed whether to send a holiday card. "Your feelings about them are allowed to be complicated." In an unexpected development, an old childhood friend named Sophia reached out through social media. We had been close in elementary school before her family moved away. Reconnecting over coffee, I was surprised when she mentioned witnessing the favoritism in my family. "I remember being so confused when your mom made a huge deal about Amanda's finger painting, but barely glanced at your perfect spelling test," she recalled. "Even as kids, we noticed it wasn't right." Hearing that even children had recognized what my parents denied brought a strange comfort. It wasn't just my perception. The inequality had been real and observable to outsiders. My relationship with my grandparents deepened during this time. We established a tradition of Sunday dinners whenever possible, either at their assisted living facility or at our home when they felt well enough to visit. These meals became precious opportunities for them to share family stories, particularly about my mother's childhood, helping me understand the generational patterns that had shaped our family dynamic. Your mother was the baby of the family, my grandmother explained one Sunday. Her older brothers were already teenagers when she was born. I'm afraid we might have overcompensated by making everything special for her. We never intended for that pattern to continue with her own children. My grandfather's health continued to decline, making these gatherings all the more precious. He had always been my strongest advocate, and knowing our time together was limited, lent our conversations a poignant quality. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned that Amanda's dog accessory business had failed within 3 months. Apparently, she had opened a boutique in an expensive retail location, but had underestimated the operating costs and overestimated demand. The store closed quickly, leaving her with more debt than she had started with. I also heard that my parents were struggling financially after my grandparents cut off their support. My father had been planning to retire early, but now had to continue working. My mother had to take on extra tutoring hours to make ends meet. The knowledge brought me no joy, only a complicated sadness that they had become so dependent on external support, while insisting they had always managed on their own. As the 1-year mark of our estrangement approached, Nathan and I began serious discussions about starting our own family. My primary concern was whether I could break the cycle of favoritism and emotional neglect that had characterized my childhood. What if it's in my DNA? I worried aloud one night. What if I unconsciously repeat the patterns I grew up with? The fact that you're even asking that question makes you different, Nathan pointed out. Your parents have never questioned their approach, never sought to understand how it affected you. You're already breaking the cycle by being aware and concerned. We decided to start trying for a baby, a decision that filled me with both excitement and trepidation. The prospect of creating a family based on the values I had been denied, equality, unconditional love, and celebration of each person's unique qualities, was powerfully appealing. The holidays arrived, the first I would spend completely estranged from my parents. Rather than allowing the season to become a time of heightened pain, Nathan and I decided to create new traditions. We hosted a family of choice dinner for friends who also couldn't be with their biological families, decorated our home with ornaments that held meaning for us, rather than obligatory family heirlooms, and volunteered at a local shelter serving Christmas dinner. It was during this holiday season that I received an unexpected text message from Amanda. "Can we talk, just us?" After consulting with Dr. Rivera and Nathan, I agreed to meet her for coffee at a neutral location. Amanda looked different when I saw her, less polished and more subdued than I remembered. The confident sister who had always taken center stage seemed diminished somehow. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she began after our initial awkward greetings. "And some therapy too, actually." She explained that after her business failed and our parents could no longer bail her out financially, she had been forced to get a regular job for the first time in her adult life. The structure and accountability had been challenging but ultimately beneficial. Her therapist had helped her recognize the unhealthy dynamics in our family and her role in them. "I always knew I was the favorite," she admitted, staring into her coffee cup. "I didn't understand what that meant for you until recently. I just took it for granted that Mom and Dad would always make things work out for me." I listened cautiously, part of me wanting to believe in this apparent growth, another part wary of being manipulated again. "They're still struggling," she continued. "Dad's health isn't great, and Mom's picking up extra work. They talk about you a lot, but they still don't get it. They see themselves as victims in all this, like you and Grandma and Grandpa ganged up on them." There was no request for money or help in our conversation, just an awkward but seemingly genuine attempt to acknowledge the past. We parted with no promises of reconciliation, but perhaps the tiny seed of a new kind of sister relationship, one based on adult understanding rather than childhood roles. 2 years after the confrontation that changed everything, I discovered I was pregnant with our first child. As I shared the news with Nathan and later with my grandparents, who were overjoyed despite their declining health, I found myself reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The question of whether to allow my parents limited contact with their grandchild became a point of serious consideration. After much discussion with Nathan and Dr. Rivera, I decided that carefully bounded contact might be possible if my parents could respect clear boundaries and acknowledge, at least in some small way, the patterns of the past. I drafted an email outlining my conditions, emphasizing that any relationship with my child would require respecting me as a parent and treating all children in the family, including any future siblings, with equal love and attention. I sent it knowing they might reject these terms, but feeling stronger for having articulated my needs. While waiting for their response, I focused on preparing for motherhood in practical and emotional ways. I read parenting books that emphasized emotional intelligence and recognizing each child's unique needs. I journaled about the kind of mother I wanted to be, the values I wanted to instill, and the family culture Nathan and I hoped to create. My healing journey continued not in a straight line, but in a series of steps forward and occasional steps back. There were still days when a particular memory would trigger old pain, times when I questioned whether I had done the right thing in standing up for myself. But these moments became less frequent and less intense as I built a life based on genuine connection rather than obligation and performance. My relationship with my grandparents became the template for healthy family bonds. Though their health continued to decline, their wisdom and unconditional love remained constant. The greatest gift you can give your child, my grandmother told me, her hand resting on my growing belly, is to know they are loved exactly as they are. The family I was creating with Nathan would not be perfect. No family is. But it would be built on awareness, intention, and the determined breaking of harmful cycles. My child would grow up knowing they were valued for who they were, not for how well they performed or how closely they matched parental expectations. As I prepared to become a mother myself, I realized that my parents' failings had, in their own painful way, taught me what not to do. Their inability to love both their children equally had shown me how crucial such equality is. Their conditional approval had taught me the importance of unconditional acceptance. Sometimes the greatest lessons come from negative examples. Sometimes saying no is the most important yes you can give yourself. So, what about you? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members? What helped you find the strength to stand up for yourself? Share your experiences in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more stories about finding your worth, even when those who should value you the most fail to do so. Remember, sometimes the family we choose is more nurturing than the family we're born into. Thank you for listening, and I wish you the courage to honor your own worth always.